All right, let's get into it. We start very similar to how we start many classes after having said all that. Half butterfly. So this is a great hamstring stretch. And as usual, we're looking for a stretch here. But today, we're also emphasizing the fact that if you round your back coming forward and down, you are going to stretch the back of your spine gently. And that's the key. We really want that to be gentle. So just let your arms and head and neck all relax and just let gravity pull you into the pose, okay? If you see me sort of rolling my head and neck around, I've had some neck issues that have been bothering me, I'd say, since my mid-40s. There's always seems to be a part of my body that's, off slightly. Unlike when I was younger, I just didn't have any pain anywhere. And it's interesting, actually. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's fun, but it's kind of interesting. It's like this ball that's being hit around my body. So I'm pretty good at healing my body by doing stuff on my own and then also working with body workers. That's, for me, really the key, is that collaborative effort. I do everything I can on my own, and I can do a lot on my own as a yoga teacher, but I still need help every now and then. The help really is helpful. So, I've had issues with my right hip, and then my left hip, and then my back, and my left shoulder, and then my right shoulder in a different spot, not the same spot. And right now, one of the main areas that's bugging me is my neck. And all those other areas are relatively good at this point. Still feel a little bit in my left shoulder, my left hip, my back. It doesn't bother me, but it just feels sensitive. I feel like something is not completely healed there. So, these are things that I continue to work on. But right now, my neck is more what you would call acute, which means that it's actually kind of, when I move it, it kind of bothers me right now. So in a posture like this, I might sort of roll my neck, like right there is kind of a sweet spot. I can feel tension. And so I might roll my neck and just hold it there and allow the posture to release the tension that's there. And it's very therapeutic. So I want to mention that because it's not something I mention often, although you may see me doing that, moving my spine and neck. I'm looking for that place where that line of tension kind of catches. And it really is a pretty stark difference, like nothing, and then all of a sudden you feel it catch. So you're feeling the muscles respond. The trigger point, you might say, gets triggered. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what I want. I want to trigger that and then breathe and relax there. And that tells my body, A, to relax, and B, to try and fix or heal whatever is going on there. So I'm actually looking for the painful spots. I'm not trying to avoid them. I'm looking for them. And that's what you'll see if you see me sort of rolling my neck and moving my torso around a bit. Okay, let's switch sides. Okay, same thing. This is the half butterfly. So again, you might kind of see me leaning off, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I can feel a lot of tension here for some reason. And I don't really know any reason why my body should be holding so much tension here, but just right now, that's what I'm feeling. So as I do this posture, I'm trying to address that. I imagine it may have something to do with what I'm feeling in my neck, in that, you know, we hold our bodies from the ground up. So there could be something wrong with my foot or my shoes or my hip or knee or maybe my back, and that could be leading to what's going on in my neck. I really don't know. It could be the other hip. So like I've said, this left hip has been more troublesome recently. For a long time, it was my right side, and I could not get that right for a really long time. It took a few years for it to heal completely. And I don't even know what caused that. And that's kind of how my neck and my hip, and like I said before, I was in my mid 40s, it really wasn't like that. But now it seems like I can just wake up one day and there can be something that's just feels off. It can be, you know, very acute pain sometimes. So the good news, that's the bad news, is that happens. The good news is that I've been able to heal and manage for the most part, again, by doing yoga on my own and also working with body workers. I will say that if I had more time and a freer schedule, I could probably do more on my own. But like everybody else, I have time restrictions. So that's what's nice about working at Brightfire, is you've got this time allotted every week, 2 times allotted, that you can take this time to do this. And 2 times a week is not bad. That's a very, very good start. Sometimes that's more than I'm able to get in a week. Right now, I'm trying to practice yoga every day. I'm trying to be a little more aggressive in my healing. I've cut down on my hiking a bit, my walking a bit, trying to get out for at least 30 minutes, which for me is the minimum. And then also trying to do, you know, maybe an hour of yoga. But even though I teach yoga, even though I don't work a 9 to 5, it still is very, very challenging. So my chiropractor shared a story with me where there was a woman who was a yoga teacher who worked for her. And apparently she used to tell people, you know, oh, you can find time to do yoga. You know, you just need to get it in there, or whatever. Apparently she was very, very sort of assuming about the free time that people had. And apparently she just recently got a 9 to 5, and she's like struggling with trying to find time to do yoga and take care of her body now. And my chiropractor was kind of laughing at that because, yeah, it's, you know, some people might find it easier if they have a more free schedule or whatnot. But even with my schedule, I still find it challenging. So I can only imagine. It really is a challenge. So do the best you can, because it really is a game changer. I can tell when I stop doing the self-care. I really can tell the difference. Now, that's one of, you could say, the benefits of being in your late 40s is if you don't take care of yourself, you kind of get instant feedback. When you're younger, one of the problems, you might say, is your body is so resilient, you can very often abuse it and not really realize. And you might think, well, then it's not having an effect, but it is. It is having a long-term effect. For instance, if I had started taking better care of myself in my 20s, which I didn't do anything in my 20s, I may not be having some of the problems I'm having now. You know, some of the things I'm dealing with now may have been the result of choices that I'd made earlier. Okay, let's go ahead and unwind from that. Come back onto our back and just relax. Okay, let's do the first of our 2 twists, okay? So we'll take the left leg and we'll bring it up and drop it over. So this is going to be a cattail. Let me move my transmitter. So we move this leg back, move this leg up. I'm going to bend it just because of the space I have here, but you could keep that leg straight. And then we bend the knee and grab that foot. Make sure it's the bottom leg. When I teach this live in person with people, I almost always see someone who's grabbing the top leg. Okay, that is a stretch. It's just a different stretch than the one we're doing here. And, you know, if you have a reason for doing that, if this is just not accessible for you, then fine. But ideally, we all do the same pose so that when I talk about the different points, you can actually experiment and, you know, try it out, see what it feels like. So we can move this foot around, right? And that might change what you feel significantly. So don't ignore that. The left leg, as I mentioned, could be straight or bent. Straighter is generally more intense. And it can be closer to your face, which is also more intense. So by the same mechanism, if you want less intensity, then you bend the knee and you lower it. Okay, so some people have really tight quads and hip flexors, and so this can be a challenging shape for them. One way you know if that's happening to you is very often your right knee will be forward of the rest of your body. I don't know if you can see, but my right knee is behind me. That's called hyperextension. And that means that, you know, my quads and hip flexors are relatively open. My massage therapist was working on me last week, and he took my leg and put my heel to my buttocks, and he chuckled to himself and he said, "Yep, you're a yoga teacher, all right." And what he was meaning is that probably most of the people he tries to do that to, they can't do that. So, you know, that level of flexibility he's not used to seeing in the general population. Now, the thing that I want to impress upon you is we don't want that to be only for yoga teachers, because that is just, this is not an extreme level of flexibility that I have. This isn't what I should say is unusual if we're healthy. There are yoga teachers who do things that are unusual, that are, you know, not things that most people can do. And generally, I just categorize that as contortionism. So there is some contortionism in yoga. That's where some people need to go to get a stretch. So let the contortionist do the contortions. I want someone who has that kind of body to stretch, just like I want someone who has a very average body to stretch. So it's not that there isn't a place for contortions in yoga. There are, because some people have more flexibility. We want everyone to stretch, okay? We want everyone to stretch to their safe limit. So there is a safe limit for everybody, even a contortionist, okay? So that's the key. Some people need to go further. But something like this, which is just having quads that are open, that shouldn't be something special. It shouldn't be rare. There are whole populations of people who rest and sit normally in a squat. In fact, sometimes online you see it, and it's called the Asian squat, which is where you're kind of sitting all the way down. But my understanding is this isn't just for Asian people. It's just that in Asian cultures, they very often sit on the ground, and so they don't lose the flexibility in their quads. So I had somebody a few months ago who came to me and asked me, I was helping to lead a teacher training, and she came to me, she said, I heard you don't have any chairs in your house. And I was like, that's right. And she was like, that's really interesting. It's like some rumor had spread in the yoga studio, and she had heard that I don't have any chairs in my house. I have a few chairs, but they're kind of off on the side. I don't really use them. I sit on the floor primarily, and that's a very intentional choice. It's not by chance. Okay, let's switch sides here. I'm going to turn just so I can continue facing the camera, but you can just roll onto your back and then take that right leg straight up, drop it to the left, bring the left leg back. It's the same thing, cattail. So what is it about sitting on the floor? There are actually, videos on YouTube of people who they have whole channels that are basically kind of geared around shifting your lifestyle to sitting on the floor, and the benefits of that. So it's interesting because sitting on the floor generally is less comfortable, and that's why most people don't do it. Now at Brightfire, you guys work from home, so this is something that you could do. If you're in the office, I doubt you could work, sitting on the floor. And if you're interfacing directly with clients, then obviously that may not be an option. But most of us have work that we do, including me. I'm a yoga teacher, but I still have desk work to do. I still have emails to answer. I still have videos to create and things to watch. So I still interface with the computer quite a bit. And one of the nice things of working from home, and this is something that's happened to many people since the start of the pandemic, many desk workers, computer workers, many companies realize, well, we don't need all this space. People can just work from home on a laptop. So one of the benefits of that is when you aren't interfacing with clients, you can actually do work essentially in certain yoga postures. Now, one of the things about sitting on the floor is it is less comfortable, and that's good. What that means is you're going to be more apt to change your position. Now, there are a lot of floor positions that you can sit in if you have a laptop. There are several different positions. I think a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to sit crisscross applesauce or whatever, cross leg position. But that's just one position you could sit in. Now, all of the positions that you're sitting in are, to a degree, a leg stretch. That's part of the reason why people like sitting in a chair, is it essentially neutralizes the muscles in your legs. So it's very comfortable. You can stay there for a long time, but therein is part of the problem. We don't want to be still for a long period of time. Now, I get it, because I am someone who very much works well when I'm in what might be called a flow state. And there's a lot of research being done into that. So I don't do well when I'm not in a flow state. It's difficult for me. So if I'm writing, if I'm trying to get something done, it's really helpful for me to kind of immerse myself in that. And that's where, like, sitting in a chair, sitting in a desk can be really helpful, because you're not interrupted, you might say, by your body being uncomfortable. But that's part of the problem. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. So I make my body kind of comfortable, and I forget about it, and I enter into this mental flow state. Maybe good for productivity, but bad for my body. So some people, they actually set on their phone or their smartwatch an alarm that will go off. It could be whatever amount of time you want. I think a very common time is 45 minutes. And when that alarm goes off, no matter what you're doing, you get up, you stretch, you move, you walk to the kitchen, make a cup of tea, whatever it is. Because the body, it benefits just by that, even if you just stood up and then sat back down, or if you were standing, maybe go for a walk. And I don't mean a long walk, I mean just walk to the kitchen, walk back. Even that benefits you. They've done some research and they've shown this. So it doesn't have to be big. That's the thing. A lot of these things we can start improving with just small changes, little tweaks here and there. Okay, let's go ahead and unwind from that. And let's just rest for a moment. You can just roll onto your back. I'm going to turn around again, so I'm facing. I guess it doesn't really matter, but. Okay, let's pull the legs in, give them a little squeeze. And then we'll hinge up. Okay, half dragonfly is next. So I think this is the first posture that really might give some people some grief. It's not to say people can't struggle with cattail, but most people find a way to do it that's relatively comfortable. This one can be a struggle. So immediately, if you feel like you're being pulled back like that, bend your knees, maybe sit up on something so that if you fell asleep, you would fall forward, okay? Now, what we'd like to do is, I'm not going to mirror, so you're going to go that way and fold over left foot, okay? Just make sure it's your left foot. And then you come down, and you want to feel two things, a stretch in here. It might be in the back of the thigh, it's fine. Just, this is adductor magnus that's stretching the most likely. Okay, and then here, these are your obliques, and maybe up here, these are your intercostals. So those are the areas we're targeting, and you'll see I'm going to roll my shoulder back so that I can get into my side as well as my leg. Okay, it's called a half dragonfly. So these things are things that we're learning. They're things that are coming up because our health is suffering in general. There are all kinds of problems that are just kind of on the rise And there likely isn't just one cause. You see, we modern people, we live in an unprecedented time for human beings. You might look back over the last, I don't know, 200 years and think, well, you know, people have been living like this for a long time, but that's not actually true. There have been significant changes in the way we produce food, in the way we deal with medical conditions, in the way that we work. And you might think that these aren't significant or they shouldn't impact our health or our well-being, but the science is saying otherwise. So it's tricky because you might say the FDA and all these other organizations, they look at things in isolation. And they might say, well, plastics leach into your food, but it's only a little bit, so it doesn't really matter. They might say, well, you know, there's pesticides in the food, but it's only a little bit, and so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, there's pollution in the air and the water, but it's only a little bit, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, you know, you're supposed to move and exercise, and people are sitting more, but it's a little bit more than before, so it doesn't really matter. But all of these things likely add up in some way or another. And they add up and they add up and they add up. And you might think it is only affecting you, or that you're only being affected by the changes that we've made now. But what's interesting is some of the research I'm doing right now is based on epigenetics. And epigenetics is the way that environmental, mental, and emotional stress affect the way your genes express themselves. So this is the whole nature versus nurture thing, right? Even if you're born with a perfect set of genes, if you smoke and drink and abuse your body, we all know that's going to age you faster and you're going to have more health issues, right? No one is going to argue with that point. Even if you never develop any serious disease, you're still less healthy than you would have been if you had taken care of yourself. We all understand that. We all know that environmental inputs are going to affect the way that your genes express themselves, right? You can have the best genes in the world, and if you abuse your body, then you're just not going to age as well as you could have. You're not going to be as healthy as you could have been. So those are epigenetic changes. What's interesting that we're learning, and again, this is new information that we're finding out, is those changes can be passed down to your offspring. Let's change sides. Okay, so this is half dragonfly side 2. So why is that significant or important for us to understand? Well, let's go back to, say, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And it's not to say that humans weren't already living in an altered environment when we had agriculture. Agriculture is already a big technological change from the way human beings were designed to live. But agricultural societies were more or less unchanged for thousands of years. in this book that I recommend everybody read called Sapiens, he says that, there were times in Europe in the past where if you had dropped into a village, a European village, and you lived there, and then we just took a time machine and dropped you 1,000 years later in the same village, you wouldn't known that anything had really changed. Essentially, the way people did things, of course, the people would be different, right? 1,000 years later, that's like, many generations, but life was unchanged, essentially. People were milking their cows, they were growing eggs or having chickens to lay eggs, they were tilling the land, pretty much just the same life going on thousands of years later. Can you imagine if we fast forward 1,000 years, what things are going to look like? Like when I was born, there was no internet. So my lifetime, there's already a huge change. Think about movie plots and things like that. When I was growing up, there was no movie plot, so-and-so takes out their cell phone. There was no cell phone. So if someone needed a phone in a movie, they had to find a phone. They had to go to a phone. Even if you look at like The Matrix, that movie, right, in the 90s, they go to a payphone to get out of the Matrix. Like today, that's almost unthinkable. Like, are there any payphones left? I don't even know if there's such a thing anymore. So, point being, in the past, technology and life moved very slowly. And that allowed people to develop ways of dealing with the stresses. And that's what we might call culture, right? Things like manners and, ways that you deal with the technology. So these things developed over hundreds or thousands of years. Because things change slowly, people could manage. They could figure it out, You'd be like, well, great-grandpa did this. That didn't work, so let's try this. And then you find a solution, and then you pass that down from generation to generation. And word spreads, and then other people in your village, in town, and eventually the whole country might learn what you'd learned by making a mistake. So a lot of trial and error, but over time you ended up with something that works very well. Now we don't do that, do we? We rely on science. So we have scientists, they go into their lab, they do a few experiments, maybe over 5 or 10 years. In the case of COVID vaccines, right, a few months, not really a very long time. And then they determine something is safe or not safe. But do we really know the impact, the long-term impact of these changes? The answer is no, we don't. I don't care what anyone says. The add up of all these little changes that in isolation someone says it's safe or it's okay, maybe in the totality it creates problems. And the reason I can say with confidence that the answer is no is because, again, if we really had a handle on things, we would not have these health crises. And we do. Again, in the stuff that I read, you may not be reading it, but what I read, it's clear that there are certain health conditions that are just getting out of control. All right, let's unwind from that. We'll make our way onto our back. Let's relax for a few moments. So this brings us back to this idea of holistic. And yoga is part of what, some people might call a holistic worldview, holistic healing. It tries to look at the whole human and the whole environment, like everything that's going on. You know, if you go to a Ayurvedic doctor or you go to a acupuncturist, they might ask you things like, are you sleeping? Did you change your diet? Do you eat lots of hot and spicy foods? Are you really stressed out at work? Right? These types of things, because your emotional, mental stress is going to have an impact on your physical body, and vice versa. All right, let's finish up with one last twist. You can give your legs a little squeeze, shake it out. And then make sure you know your left and your right. And we're going to take the left knee over the right. So just like that. You can lock ankles if you want, but you certainly don't have to. And then to the left, very important. Okay, and this is called twisted roots. A little bit awkward, but we're trying to stretch the side of the hip as well as twist the spine. So we're trying to target two areas. So again, if the powers that be really understood what was going on, if they really knew what was causing these health problems, then they would simply solve the problem. But the environment we're in now, you have a group of individuals. I don't think they're evil, and within the context of what they're being asked to consider, they can be 100% right. Right? So FDA is just looking at food. And so they might look at a particular method to grow a piece of food, and they're testing for a limited number of things. And they might say, yeah, that food's safe. But there might be things they're not testing for that they're not aware of that are problematic, with, say, a pesticide or, you know, a certain ingredient that they put into, say, cookware that ends up leaching into the food. And it's only years later that they discover that, oh, this is actually harmful. And again, if you think I'm being alarmist, this has happened. This has happened in my lifetime. Once again, there have been things that the Food and Drug Administration or a medical body has said, this is safe. And then years later, they have to say, stop doing that. It's not safe. Okay. So again, if their methods were foolproof, then this would never happen. So the point of me telling you all of this is, to some degree, if we want to get a handle on our health, first of all, I think it's really important that you take responsibility for your health. We don't have time to research everything, right? To test everything and all this kind of stuff. So to some degree, we have to rely on the FDA and some of these, the CDC and these other bodies. But at the same time, we don't have to give all of our power away. And we don't have to believe everything. So in general, we know, and again, we know this because the trend, right? The trend. So the trend is there are a lot of diseases, like we're coming up with new diseases all the time. And I don't mean we're discovering them, I mean they're actually being created. There are some tribes that if you go to, and remember that tribal people are the most natural humans. So, and if you go to a farming village, that is not as natural as someone who's actually living in a natural way, which means in a tribe. Tribes don't grow their own food. They're hunter-gatherers. They find food and they hunt food. They don't sit around and grow it. So even if you're talking about a farming village, you're already a step removed from what would be healthiest for you. But what we're learning, and we're learning this the hard way again because of all these diseases and things that are happening, and these are the indicators that the scientists and the FDA and the CDC and all these people, they don't have the big picture, because if they did, this would not be happening once again. So if they really had all the answers, then we wouldn't see diseases on the rise. The government would have shut down whatever it is that's causing the disease. So anyway, these things are happening. If we say, okay, let's just take one step back. So someone living in a farming village is generally going to be healthier than we are. So again, there are a lot of little things we can do to take us back in that direction. So one thing that's new is we now have like non-organic foods. So even if you, before we go there, if you just go to Whole Foods, this is a very important step that you can make. All right, let's switch sides. Okay, so on this side, it's going to be right over left, and then down to the right side. So yeah, let's not even talk about organics. Let's just talk about whole foods. And this is important because some people get really hung up on veganism, vegetarianism, like what specifically you're eating. For me, that's much less important than you are eating whole foods. What I mean by whole foods, I mean a food that grew in a plant or in an animal, wasn't produced in a factory. So that's going to include things like power bars. Those are not whole foods. Even if you're taking a bunch of organic grains and mashing them up and mixing them with organic agave nectar and all this other stuff, that's not a whole food. It might be vegan, it might be vegetarian, it might be keto. It's not a whole food. Okay, a whole food is like broccoli, lettuce, olives, nuts, chicken, beef, salmon, right? The ingredients, that's a whole food. So even if you just say, you know what, I'm not going to eat a power bar for lunch, I'm not going to have a Snickers as a snack, whatever it is, that's huge. The next huge thing you can do is reduce or eliminate sucrose and fructose as much as possible. So sucrose is table sugar. I know it's delicious. It's also in everything. So you're probably not going to be able to eliminate it, but at least trying to get away from things that have a lot of it in it. So for instance, like soda, really, really a disaster. Even like a little soda, it just has so much sugar in it. Fructose, same thing, especially high fructose corn syrup. But even fruits, I know fruits have good things in them, but you can eat too much fruits actually. It can be a problem. So if you have a sweet tooth, I know that's difficult. There are a few natural sweeteners like stevia and ethereal. I can't pronounce that word, but there are a few natural sweeteners that are safe. But things like aspartame, like diet sodas, like Diet Coke or something like that, it's still a problem because aspartame still affects your digestion and insulin level and things like that. It still messes with you. So that's the problem there. So that's another huge thing you can do is just say, okay, I'm not having any more sodas, diet soda, whatever. Again, sucrose, so sweetening your coffee or your tea with sugar, learning to cut that out. And you may be able to find some natural sweeteners. And so natural sweetener, different than artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners you generally have to avoid. Then again, I mentioned already organic. That might be the next step that you take after switching to whole foods and then getting rid of the sodas. Again, a soda is not a whole food, right? It's not. Coffee is, just straight coffee is a whole food. So is tea, right? So is water, obviously. But soda, it's made in a factory. They're mixing all kinds of ingredients together. Again, generally, you know you're running into dangerous territory there. So whole foods, getting rid of sucrose and fructose, or at least trying to minimize it. Again, it's in everything. If you go to a restaurant and you order a burger, there's probably fructose or sugar in your bun, in your burger bun. It's in everything. They just put it everywhere, unfortunately for us. So it's almost impossible to eliminate. So going organic, more expensive, but you can ask yourself what's really more expensive, doing that or, having to pay for insulin because you become a diabetic or something like that. You want to think long term, folks. And again, health is kind of a long term game. So there's a lot of things that people are doing now that they assume are safe because, again, it's FDA approved. Like, Coke, you don't need to be a certain age to have a Coca-Cola, right? So it's got to be safe, right? It's okay. It's not okay, unfortunately. As a treat every now and then, it's fine. But people drink Coke like they drink water. They just are slurping down Coke after Coke. I'd say even daily is a problem. So as a treat once a week or twice a week, I think that might be okay, but you're still not going to be doing yourself any favors. All right, let's unwind from that. And again, all of this is based on other people who are much smarter than me. These are books that I read and things that I collect, data I collect from doctors and scientists and stuff who are researching all this stuff. I was reading a book just the other day, and he's, again, kind of sounding the alarm about a certain health condition. And he said, I wrote this book because I didn't want you to have to wait, for this information to trickle down to the general public, which usually, he said, takes about a decade. So the research comes out, and then it takes about a decade until it starts, you start hearing about it. That's generally the way that it works. So that's how a lot of this stuff is. And a lot of the stuff we grow up with, we assume is true. Like when I was growing up, it was very common to talk about low fat, low fat, low fat. I think people still even think low fat is good for you. Well, there's been a lot of research that shows that fat's not the problem. Cutting out fat from your diet can create a lot of problems. So obesity, heart disease, these things, it's actually other factors. It's not the fat that's the source of the problem. So low-fat diet isn't necessarily going to reduce heart disease. How do we know? Because when they implemented the low-fat diet, heart disease kept rising. If anything, it got worse. So again, sounds good in theory. The FDA, scientists might say, here's what you need to do. They're not foolproof. They make mistakes, and sometimes, stuff is based on very little evidence, and they just make recommendations because they have to, and sometimes it's the wrong way to go. All right, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out. So again, if there's one thing I want you to take away from the class today, it's that you don't really want to give away the responsibility for your health to anybody, not to your doctor, not to your yoga teacher, not to the FDA or the CDC. You really want to do a little bit of due diligence on your part. You know, if someone says something, you don't necessarily, even me, you don't want to just take what I'm saying at face value, but I have faith that if you dig into what I'm saying, if you research it, you're going to find the evidence is there. Doesn't mean I'm right about everything or the people I'm reading are right about everything, but it's worth just looking at, right? Again, and then you make up your own mind. But, you know, these organizations, it's not that anyone's trying to do you harm or there's some conspiracy theory, but we just live in this big machine. And everyone's doing their little part, but unfortunately, again, the whole picture, the big picture, is that on many levels, mental, physical, emotional, we're not doing okay. And by many measures, our health is declining generation by generation. And that's what I was saying about the epigenetics. Maybe that first generation that had to deal with industrialization, maybe they were relatively healthy coming from an agricultural background. Maybe they were very hardy. Maybe their epigenetics were in really good shape. And then as we've gone through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 generations of living with industrialization and those things magnifying, our epigenetics have gone down and down and down, our epigenetic health. These changes have been passed down from one generation to another. So we're inheriting, an epigenetic mix that has dealt with generations of industrialization and the toxins and the stress that comes with that. Industrialized life is stressful. It really is. And so even just taking a walk in nature reduces your stress, as an example. Okay? If you just go outside and look at the trees, that will help with your stress level. So imagine when you grow up in a New York City like I did, there was hardly a tree in sight. That's going to affect the way my genes express. All right, everyone, so let's relax for a few minutes, just coming onto your back, close your eyes.